I guess as just kind of an overview of just what this really is about, this is about essentially prison camps in Romania, and it actually kind of it covers a weird period of time because before 1946, Romania was actually under a sort of a fascist regime or a monarchical regime, and then after the war, it became a Soviet regime. And what's interesting about that, I think, is that it's Valeriu and many of his compatriots were sent to the prisons before the Soviets got there. So they were sent there because of essentially a national fascist regime. And then Valeriu and many of them either elected to stay because as the communists took over those prisons, they were offered deals to get out, based on re-education or what have you, or offers to, in some form an offers of informing and all those things. So that kind of creates a kind of interesting dynamic because the legionnaires, the brotherhood, existed in a very kind of odd space between the kind of state, which was more centered on the monarchy, and then there was sort of Bolsheviks on one side, communism on the other side, and then the brotherhood. And I kind of want to get this out of the way because I think what's important about this book again is less the legionnaire movement and more Valeriu as a person, because I think as far as what we can get, what's edifying about it, what I think is genuinely, authentically Christian is more of the experience of these people in the prisons than the Brotherhood itself. And the Brotherhood itself is something that is, I think, not, I mean, I don't think there's like a really easy way to sugarcoat this, but it basically is a fascist anti-Semitic organization that was intertwined with Orthodoxy and had some ideas in there that are good. But I think just right off the bat, we can say that things like anti-Semitism or political assassinations. For example, the Brotherhood carried out assassinations against police officers and other politicians they thought were sort of undermining Romania. Those are no good. Honor killings are no good. Honor killings is not Orthodox. And also a cult of personality. Just to kind of rewind a little bit. Again, in this period after World War I, there's a great deal of ideological conflict. There's a lot of nationalistic movements. A lot of territory has been reassigned after the Treaty of Versailles. In the case of Romania, Romania became huge because apparently the Queen of Romania was a very good diplomat. And in principle, what this meant is that a bunch of people who were used to being grouped under the same roof were now under the same roof. And so, in that kind of tempestuous mix, the Brotherhood sort of emerged as a kind of desire to reinvigorate the Romanian roots, and its roots in this case being distinctly Orthodox. And compared to other groups like, Mussolini's Italy or Nazi Germany, those things were more strictly focused on kind of maybe even pagan roots, maybe even going back to, some kind of antiquity. In the case of the Nazis, they're going back to, ruined ancient, like Wotan and stuff like that, and kind of doing this blend of ancient paganism with kind of new modern scientific. Romania being an Orthodox nation from antiquity, or from a long time ago anyway, that was the kind of expression of this kind of nationalist movement in the form of, in this particular form, the legionnaire movement was about revitalizing the Romanian national identity through its Orthodox roots. And I think that idea in and of itself isn't really what's wrong, but I think what typically happens is that really what happened, I think, at that level is just, what happens is orthodoxy becomes an accessory to nationalism, right? Orthodoxy, and you see this a lot, I think, even in contemporary, this is a common temptation, I think, of Orthodox people, and even Catholics, to take, for example, Polish people. To them, Catholicism, to many people, what matters is, Poland, or what matters is Russia, or what matters is Romania. And the fact that there is orthodoxy there from many centuries ago is just something that they grab onto as yet another thing, right? Yet another thing to kind of construct what is most important to them, which is a kind of national identity, a national pride. And there isn't, in my view, anything particularly wrong with having a kind of patriotic spirit and a desire and a love of your country. In many ways, a love of your country, I think, can be a love of neighbor, right? It can be a desire to sacrifice for, but all too often, what can happen with national identity is it becomes an idol. It becomes idolatrous, and the church really ceases to matter. And I think you really see this in just kind of a national chauvinism. So I'm going to kind of lay out some of the things that are most ugly about the movement before moving into things that this book talks about. Because I think what happened is this movement kind of papered over the orthodoxy, but some people who were part of this movement in prison really discovered the superficiality of that. But there is good things that happen in that, and there's a lot of that we need to learn from in terms of its mistakes, identifying like where those red lines, I guess what's really important is discerning where are those red lines, like where's the red, if it's not wrong to be patriotic, where there's still a boundary, right? If it's not wrong to feel a sense of like community and commonplace with people who speak your same language or have ethnicity, if there's something not wrong with that, still, where is the boundary? We have to find that boundary, and I think we have to find that boundary here in this group. And I think actually we have an advantage as Americans, because Americans, to be an American is really, it's more of an idea than it is a people, and so that gives us an advantage in the sense that, and it has so many cultures and so many different languages that it gives us an advantage in that it's very hard to make an idol out of the American people. It's very hard to, I think, because there isn't really like, it's such a blend of peoples and cultures that there isn't like this one distinct ethnic identity or even religious identity that really, and furthermore, Orthodoxy is just a really tiny part of our nation and the story of our nation. So anyway, I think to name a few more red flags that I think actually, this is something to watch out. Insofar as we have success, we will attract many people. We will attract many people who are conservative, but there are boundaries to who we should let in. So one red flag, of course, is anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is always this red herring. I believe it is nothing short of this. It's this way of taking something that might be otherwise legitimate and making it ridiculous by being obsessed with, all the problems of the world belong to this one group of people, right? The problems that arise in any nation have nothing to do with the Jews. The Jews are not responsible for Weimar Germany. They're not responsible for any of those things. They're not responsible for communism. It's when bad things happen in the world, the church teaches us that the problem is with us, in our hearts, right? The problem is not some particular group of people. The problems of the evil, it's not political, right? It's not a political problem. The problem with humanity is its fallenness, and the solution is Christ. The solution is to overcome that. In battling the evil in our souls and spreading it. And there's no particular ethnic group that has some, that is uniquely responsible for anything. So that's just one thing, and I don't think I need to belabor that point, but it just is something that keeps coming up, and it keeps coming up even in our society. And I think it's just something that when we ever encounter it, it's just kind of something that I don't think has anything to do with our group.
I think it'd be important, though, to probably take up the fact that it is as prevalent as it is. I mean, you see this a lot in the hyperdox world, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that buy into that. I think it's important, rather than just discounting it outright. I mean, to figure out why do they hold to it,
right?
And try to determine where they go wrong in this sense, or where the problem is. And I think what the start point is, there needs to be the distinction made between, somebody contributing to something and somebody responsible for something, right? We're seeing this now in the current situations, right? And not that I want to get deep in that, but I think that a lot of times there can be the beginning of something, right? You could have, for example, one group is unjust to another group, right? Mm-hmm. So one of the arguments, I'm not supporting this, but one of the arguments is, well, one of the reasons that there was such a backlash against the Jews in Germany is because the Jews were landlords, and they were, making it hard for people to have housing and doing unjust things, right? So I think as Orthodox Christians, first of all, is that a historical fact? I don't know. I'm just giving their argument. But what I think we have to say is even if it were true, does that give you the right to do the things that you're doing, right? There has to be, in anything that we do, there has to be a proper measure between cause and effect, right? So if somebody trips and they bump you and then you knock them out cold, right? Is that a proper, you know what I'm saying? So this is the issue, is Orthodox Christians should always be pursuing peace. We should always be trying to resolve problems in a non-violent manner. And the problem is that I see kind of underlying all that, independent of the theories that are out there that do get preposterous. The bigger issue is why do people seize on them in the first place? Well, I think they seize on them because they're not getting their legitimate grievances sometimes addressed, and so they go into this realm where now, because it's essentially so far out of the realm of the mainstream, they can have their own little bubble there that doesn't have to really deal with anything real.
Right.
And now you can just pile, like you said, all the problems of humanity on this one group. And, it doesn't matter what the group is. This is the issue, right? When you talk about racism and these different things, the problem lies in saying, because somebody's born into a group or somebody claims some affiliation, that somehow applies, right? You're applying an aspect of the universal, right? It's almost like a categorical error. You're applying universal characteristics to something as an individual, right? So if one particular person does something bad, if me as a conservative does something bad, does that mean all conservatives are bad? Right? Or whatever the case may be. Mm-hmm. And I think this is where the issue is. People don't make those distinctions. They don't think in those terms. They're looking for something, and they're going to try to seize on that. So I think in terms of how to get out ahead of this, we have to be, I think, prepared to understand that, look, it's not just a matter of dealing with the theory itself, but kind of the psychology behind that theory. Why is somebody seizing on something like that, and try to maybe deal with the problem on that level as well? And the same thing for these people, to try to understand where they're coming from, right? Not just judge them, but consider a historical context, like we're doing right now.
Sure.
And what drove them to these kinds of extremes. Once again, not to justify it, but to understand it, to help us not fall into it ourselves, something that's comparable. Right. But also too, we do this a lot. You see this a lot, right? People today are judging the past, right? And they're applying our standards today to people that lived in the past that had very different lives than we have, right? And I think it's important for us to not take up that arrogant sort of approach, but to say, hey, look, this is what was going on. This is what contributed to that. This is where it was wrong, and this is how we should avoid it, falling into those same traps ourselves, because human nature doesn't change in this regard. We are every bit as susceptible. Like I'm sure we've probably all heard this, and it's true for myself, wondering how, it is. You grow up in the world in the America I grew up in, where it was quite a bit different than it is now. You didn't have cancel culture, you didn't have political correctness, you didn't have any of this stuff, right? There was a genuine, freedom of speech, there was a genuine, people back when I was in high school, they may disagree with you, but But the reality of it is that they're not going to hate you because you're of a different opinion. And so that whole agree to disagree. That was a thing. You know, people would say, hey, I don't agree with you, but I respect your right to have that opinion. And that's what's gone now, right? So I just want to make sure that we don't fall into that on the other side, because that's where it always starts, right? You know, we can intelligently, if we're confronted with something like this, we can intelligently deal with it, rather than just say, oh, you're a kook, you're a freak, whatever, get out of the group. Right. So I know you're not saying
no,
that.
yeah. And I think it also, you know, this is a very much a time period as well. Like the discussions about anti-Semitism in particular, they're not unique to Romania. They're very much like a part of that time period, a part of the general European political climate, and also an extension of the general European relationship with Judaism, which is very long. There are many pogroms. There are many times where Jews have played extremely prominent roles in state building, in finance, in building the banking networks and so there's a lot there, and we really don't need to go into any of that. We don't need to go into any of that. It doesn't really matter. I think what just the bottom line here is that, and then the flip side to that though is that there is an emphasis, a very strong emphasis on the national Romanian character and resuscitating Romanianness. And there's something to me in there that is not necessarily, is like both good and bad, you know? I think one of the things that I think is really, how should I say? Well, one of the things that really strong ideologies like Marxism try to do is erase the past. And they try and erase the past. They try and by that I don't mean they try and like tell a different story about history. They do that, but really what's more important is they just try and reconceptualize all the traditions. So like, what does it mean to get married in Soviet Union? But prior to the Soviet Union, marriage meant basically orthodoxy. Marriage meant God. There was no secular state marriage. There is simply the sacrament of marriage, and that's true in the West and generally for a long time. The communist regime comes in and it has to redefine that. It invents, maybe not by itself, but in some ways, some new idea of what marriage is. And what that does, I think, and if you do that for everything, marriages, burials, concept of ownership, etc., you can go down the line, is that essentially it's an attempt to get rid of a previous identity, to kind of create, and I think many of these ideologies, including people on the right and the fascism, they try and create a new man. And to create a new man, you have to destroy old identities. When people don't have a strong sense of identity, they're very easy to manipulate. Because they don't have a strong sense of, a lot of our identity is like, what are our values? What are our core beliefs? So in that sense, you know, we exist in time and space. That means that we live in a certain place and we speak a certain language and we're part of a certain history. And those things are good things. Those things are an inheritance. But of course, the way that the human heart is like an idol-making factory. It can turn things into idols. But at the same time, just because you can turn a good thing into an idol does not therefore mean that thing doesn't have a kind of intrinsic good value. So the things that our parents and our parents' parents and they passed down to us, little traditions, are things that I think are worth holding on to, worth perpetuating, as long as they're kept in their proper degree, as long as we always remember that we're putting the church first, and that when those two things come into conflict, you know, Christ and the church comes out on top. But as an American, for example, things like democratic process or things like freedom of speech, these things are our traditions, and these things can be brought into the communal life of the church. The church always comes to a region and it doesn't just blast it away. You know, when Christianity came to Russia, it didn't blast away Russianness and then all of a sudden they were building Byzantine cathedrals and stuff. Rather, quite the converse. It remained Orthodox in its essence, but what happened was whatever the traditions that were there were either they vanished or they were assimilated and they were given a particular expression. So just as the most obvious and trivial example, you can look at a Russian cathedral and it looks a certain way. You can look at a Byzantine cathedral and it looks a certain way. And the fact that they look different is not, the Byzantine cathedral is made of stone, and maybe you have churches in the north of Russia and they're made of wood. Or you have churches that still in Scandinavia, they're all made of wood. Those things, they're actually not, I want to actually submit to you, these things aren't really trivial. These things are actually a treasure and inheritance, and when the church comes to them, it kind of takes them over and can sanctify them and make them holy, and in the sense that they are brought into the service of God, they are brought into the service of the church. So in that aspect, the fact that, when Christianity comes to a nation, it transforms it. Just in the same way we are sanctified, right? Our own bodies are a temple for the Spirit. Our own bodies are a temple for the Spirit, and when we give ourselves over to God, our bodies aren't obliterated, right? Our bodies are made new. And so the same way, I think the church has the ability, and what I think our brotherhood should be aiming for is the way in which a nation can be transformed, not by obliterating the nation, not by replacing its traditions as a Marxist would or a Bolshevik would or some other radical ideology, which are always pseudo-churches. Rather, it takes and identifies what is in alignment with the principles that are set out in the church and brings those into the whole. So I guess the point of what I'm trying to say is it's wrong. What I don't want to do and it's like we condemn nationalism or we condemn America, we condemn the United States of America because we're Orthodox. Here's the United States of America over there, and here's Orthodoxy over there.
And a lot of people are doing that.
A lot of people in our Orthodox world are doing that, and I think we should not do that. We need to find what is good in the traditions, what the men and women who suffered and bled and died in these lands, what they did, find what's good and bring that into the life of the church.
And the more recent example is St. Herman of Alaska.
Right.
That anybody who's researched that history, it's a whole different way of missionizing than what we've grown accustomed to in the Protestant evangelical world, right? What we more usually encounter. Right, because in a sense that's what they're doing, right? They want, because Protestants by nature are very iconoclastic, they just pretty much want to stamp out what's there with what they think is what it is. And like you said, when you're talking about cultures, you're talking about identities, this happens more organically, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the real world. And it's more natural in that regard. And I think, we need to think in those terms of culture, because that's obviously a lot, like the identity thing is the big thing now, right? In politics, identity. Politics. Everything is related around identity. And I think nationalism, this resurgence of nationalism you're seeing is a counter-reaction to that, right? To what you're seeing, the globalist style agenda, where basically you're trying to eradicate borders and boundaries, and we're all just one big, quote-unquote, happy family. Right. Which of course isn't working out so well. And so you're seeing this resurgence of nationalism in the world as a counterbalance to that. But what you see so often in history, we see this over and over again, is human beings tend to extremes, right? We tend to poles. And so rather than say, okay, well, like we're trying to do here, let's pull out the good, separate the bad out of it, it just, that's bad, so let's take up the opposite, right? Somehow the opposite of this bad is going to be good, and when it doesn't work out, once again, you're just taking the mirror image of that. And we've talked about this in the past, when you're dealing with Protestantism, as an example. Protestantism is forced by nature, because it exists in opposition to Catholicism, right? That its whole identity is tied to Catholicism somehow, or at least it was originally, and now obviously you're many generations removed, but there's still elements of that, right? It exists in reaction to, right? The truth really shouldn't be that way. The truth should stand above the extreme understandings of it, right? And so when you deal with identity, for example, like we're talking about race or whatever, I mean, ultimately what matters to me is character. I don't care what color someone is, I don't care, none of these things are important to me. As an Orthodox Christian, the only set of values we really should care about, like Paul says, is our Christian values and how those translate through culture, right? And the culture is a way of approaching the world. And so yes, you want things to kind of flow top down, but in a sense too, there's a wrestling. The people are adopting these things in their own way, and that's what produces truly Christian culture. And like you said, why things are slightly different in Russia than they are in Greece.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's nothing, like you said, there's nothing wrong with that. As long as it's in conformity with the true principles. I mean, not to say every tradition is good either, right? I mean,
Sure, yeah.
But as long as those traditions are not counter, as you said, this is good, and we should embrace them. We should employ them. And I think people just don't have any concept, unfortunately, of that. They just very extremist in their thinking. Not maybe extremists that can go blow buildings or something, but extremists in the sense of oh, well, this is one thing, and I have to do the opposite of that.
Right.
Throw the baby out with the bathwater is the expression, right?
So, with those different ideas, and it's really, really interesting because in many ways we are living through a repeat of what was going on in the 20s and 30s. In many ways, especially in the culture wars, with just, but also there is a strong concerted effort against nationalism and a strong push for nationalism in our day and age. And we are seeing the limits of globalism. I think globalism has basically had its day, and I'm not particularly sad about that.
No.
But I think with that in mind, and always I think as we move forward, discerning, the kind of boundaries of our Christian identity and then our identity as citizens, and our duty as citizens, and our Christian duty to be good citizens as Christians, still always discerning. And I think in this group, I don't think we have that problem, but I do want to just kind of think about that, insofar as we have success and attract people,
right.
This isn't about rah-rah America, it is about strengthening America. Because that's what Christians do. What Christians do is they take the society that they're a part of and they make it a little bit better. At least that's what we should do, right? We take things, regardless of the context, you could be working in McDonald's, you work in a call center. What you do as a Christian is you make what is around you a little bit better. You don't destroy things and tear things. So in many ways, Christianity, and this is another criticism, I guess, and after this criticism, I actually want to get into what's good about, and I'm going to read a bit, but, what I think makes Christianity, to kind of put my anthropologist hat on for a second, what I think makes Christianity really enduring and successful, other than the fact that it is simply the true way of God and it's guided by God, but just anthropologically, Christianity is radically different from the values that surround it, but it is also not revolutionary. In this original context, and by that I mean it doesn't seek regime change. When in the Gospels, when Christ says, render unto Caesar what's due to Caesar, and render unto God what's due to God, and then again, Paul sort of repeats this in his way in Romans 13. He says, rulers are basically put there by God. It is not in vain that the legitimate authorities have a sword over you. We have red lines in terms of what temporal authority means. We have things that we simply will not do, but there couldn't be a worse regime than the emperors of Caesar. But Christ was not calling them to overthrow the Roman government or destroy the Roman government. He was not calling for them to overthrow Pontius Pilate, tear it down and build the kingdom of Zion in Jerusalem. In the same way, when Paul was going around, he was not counseling these groups, these churches, to overthrow and replace with a revolutionary, they were not trying to overthrow the current regime. Rather, what they were doing is try to live a holy way of life that would just transform what was around them. And that's exactly what happened. Exactly what happened in the Roman Empire is a pagan Roman Empire, which persecuted the Christians and killed them, actually drowned itself in their blood. It was baptized in their blood. It couldn't sustain the persecutions, such to the point that without any particular military movement within that pagan Roman Empire, it simply became a Christian empire. It simply became one. And you can say, oh, well, Constantine did it from top down, but the society was so Christian already at the point that was an option. That was an option for him to do. And that's precisely what ended up happening. And insofar as there's any kind of revolutionary as to being an authentic Orthodox Christian. It's insofar as it's not worldly. It is rather this like transformative thing that works on its own weight over time. Insofar as we are authentic to it, insofar as we cleave to it. The moment we begin thinking that the solution is political is the moment that it begins falling apart. And I would say that's my final criticism of the Legionnaire movement. It was about revolutionary activity and political life.
And sort of the correlator
Yeah.
that I think we see in our own time, more so, at least in my own personal experience, is sort of like almost an offset in the sense that I see a lot of Orthodox Christians in the orthosphere, not so much calling for, revolution, taking up arms against the American government, or whatever, but they in a sense are wanting to see America fail.
Mm-hmm.
They're basically stepping back and saying they can't wait to see it fail because it's satanic and it's so evil. And so I'd say the other part of this is that in addition to being correct, it's also practical. With the program you lay out, it's practical. I think people, this is my opinion, but my opinion is that not maybe all of them, but some of the people that subscribe to those views, it's a form of idealism, right?
Yeah.
They basically, it's a cop-out. Hey, if we less anything short, once again, it's seeking for a political solution.
Yeah.
It's got to be a czar. It's got to be a
Right.
new, Orthodox emperor.
Right.
And anything short of that is just simply satanic.
Right.
It's totally wrong, and there's no reason to support it. And what it does, it essentially exempts them
Right.
from any kind of responsibility of having to try to make their own situation better. Look, until those things exist, it's pointless to have a discussion about it. Sure, we can work towards that, but we have to work with what we have.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what we have, with the deficiencies that it has. Look, nobody's going to argue that we're perfect, right? America has plenty of problems, but are they going to get better if we just step back and watch it burn? Shouldn't we go there and try to bring in the buckets of water, Let's do what we
Right.
can. We have to engage the culture in that way. And that's why I'm opposed to, people who, whether Rod Dreyer meant this or not, or people interpret it that way, the whole idea of just, backing out of society. I understand the desire for that because the world has gotten really evil and it's very frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
But if we don't engage the culture in the way that we can, should we really be surprised when it burns down around us? I mean, we should be that leaven, right?
Right.
And so it's kind of just the other side of what you're saying. I think that we see a lot in our own time.
Yeah, precisely. I don't think this is. I think that's a really good point that you bring out there. That there is a mentality, and I would say, to speak to another contemporary Orthodox figure, Jay Dyer. I haven't been following him in a while, but Jay Dyer often talks about the evils of liberalism. So there's orthodoxy here on one hand, and then there's liberalism over here. But we as Americans, liberalism is our inheritance. What are we going to do? It's not just a political system. It's about rights and, the idea of, personal sovereignty.
And there's different liberalism,
right? There's different liberalism.
Yeah.
I think it is a mistake to go and say, well, we just have to toss that all out and hope that the American empire just explodes, right? No, we have to be going out there putting out the fires, I think. And primarily that isn't through a political prescription where we're like, we are against liberalism. It's just, we go to work and we try to be the best human beings that we possibly can.
And the labels matter, this
Yeah.
thing too. I don't care. To me, it's not about conservative liberal. It's about values, right? If conservatives uphold more of my values, our Orthodox values, okay, in that sense, I'm quote unquote conservative. But it's not because once again, it's not an identity. The identity doesn't matter. It's what are the values? What is the character? What is the nature of the thing itself? And that's what should drive us rather than the label that we put on it, right? If you get too attached, and like you said, they idolatrize the labels, I think, on these things. Did you gentlemen have anything to add before you go? He look at you, had something like you want to say.
No.
No, okay.
Not me. No.
Okay, so with all that in mind, and with especially on this point of the kind of personal responsibility aspect, because it's kind of what it comes down to, is kind of personal and also spiritual, I think in some sense you have to have a faith in God to believe that your day-to-day little acts, your struggle against the evil in your heart is actually going to have an effect in the world. You have to believe, you have to trust God. And we turn to politics, I think, a lot of times when we stop trusting God. And that's when we trust in man, in the science of man, the political science of man.
Trust the science, man.
Yeah, because that's what, as Aristotle put it, politics is the chief of the sciences. So politics is the like the architectonic science that sort of underwrites all other sciences. And that's true if you just take God completely out of the picture, right? So we don't put our faith in politics. We don't ignore politics.
Right.
We don't ignore politics. We don't like stop voting or something like that.
Right.
We just don't. We know that the solution is not there in the politics. And the thing is, we do need a new man that is Christ in us. We do need a new man. And I think what's always interesting about these ideologies from the 20s and the 30s, you know, fascism and whether it's Hitler or Stalin, there's this emphasis on needing a new man. A new man. You can't have the stateless state where everyone is completely equal and desires not to take from their brother unless you have a new man. And I think in many cases, I mean, people got over that. They weren't able to create new men, in the period from the World War II till the collapse of the Soviet Union. And they were, and again, in the fascist case, they were trying to create new men as well, and that didn't work either. But okay, so enough about fascism and communism. I guess I wanted to just read a little bit about the Brotherhood of the Cross, insofar as it has something that we can learn about. So I guess I'm just going to read. I'm going to read a little bit here. So Legionarianism was, from a spiritual point of view, and in spite of all human shortcomings, a preparation for martyrdom. This was clearly reflected in the Legionnaires' behavior in communist prisons, where they showed the true measure of their worth. Of the hundreds of thousands of political prisoners, this is page 31, by the way. Of the hundreds of thousands of political prisoners, a significant number came from among their ranks. In any case, the finest and largest number of Orthodox prisoners were legionnaires. For all of these men, training in the legionnaire movement was a preparation for the difficult trials to which they would be later subjected. After wandering off in different directions, Codriano and other young people, troubled by the need to do something for their country, realized that what was needed to instigate a profound change in society was not so much a new party or a new political program, as they themselves have been tempted to believe, but rather an education of a Christian and national character that would lead to moral renewal. Quote, "This country is perishing from a lack of people, not from a lack of programs. This is our opinion. It is not programs that we must create, but people, new people. Therefore, the cornerstone from which the Legion sets out is humankind, not political programs. The reform of people, not the reform of political programs. Therefore, the Legion of the Archangel Michael will be a school and an army rather than a political party. The Romanian people at this point in history do not need a great politician, as some mistakenly believe, but a great educator and leader to vanquish the powers of evil and shatter the ranks of evildoers. In order to do this, however, we must first overcome the evil in himself and his brethren." I'm just going to add just a little footnote here. Insofar as this goes, so this is actually coming from Codriano, who was the leader of who founded the Brotherhood of the Cross. It's ironic that he's saying this in many ways, because really the Brotherhood of the Cross became in many ways a cult of personality around him. He had an iron grip on that group. But what he's saying here is true, because what he's saying here is really no different, I think, than what St. Paul writes in Romans, which is about the need that in baptism we die, right? That we might be reborn to Christ. And that's very much at the heart of the gospel. That's very much at the heart of Christianity, which is that when we are baptized, when we come to Christ, when we are converted, even in confession, even in all the sacraments, really what they're about is renewal. They're about putting off that old life and entering into a completely different radical way of life, the life that Christ lays out for us. And the way that he lays it out in his conduct and then is passed through to the apostles. So I just want to bring on that point, because the new man thing is something you see a lot in political ideologies, but it's really just a sign of Antichrist. It's a sign of false churches. And only in the Orthodox Church is there a potential for a new man to exist, insofar as our fallen human nature allows God into our life.
Well, I think we should probably delve on that point for a minute.
Yeah.
So the difference, again, we got to start thinking in terms of distinctions.
Right.
Okay, these two things look the same, and they are the same in some ways, but they're also different in other ways. What's that difference? What constitutes that difference? And I think that part of it, at least, maybe not the totality, but part of it is the fact that our new man respects the existing man. Versus, if you look at these ideologies, they're trying to stamp out. Once again, it's a matter of destroying what was there to impose a new form. We don't do that in Christianity. Christianity works with us where we are. It takes what we are, it transfigures it, right? It's not destroying what was there. It's making it what it was supposed to, bringing it back to what it was originally designed to be, right?
Yeah, right.
So that's different. We're not destroying. There's no destruction involved. There's moving past. Because sin doesn't have any true existence, right? Sin is a it's a privation. It's a lack of something that should be there, as we've talked about before. So it's a matter of removing that sin. It's a matter of removing that distortion, right? So the thing itself can function the way it was intended in the first place.
Yeah.
So I think that's a very different thing versus these fascism, all these tyrannical, totalitarian systems are crushing and forcing conformity, right, to this external form. Versus with us, our conversion has to be internal. So it has to derive from the inside out rather than be imposed really from the outside in.
Right. And I also, what makes it different is that in this transformation is only possible insofar as we give ourselves over to God, to something that we can't control or predict or fully understand. Whereas the new man project of either communism or Nazi Germany is really man designing man by virtue of the science of politics. Mm-hmm. And that therein, right there, it's already an anthropological view rather than a theopological view. I don't know what the opposite is.
Anthropocentric.
It's an anthropocentric, right? It's modern ideologies. They're anthropocentric. They make an idol out of man. And I also, what Nazism and communism both focus on is destroying their enemies, winning, stamping out dissent, destroying, and whereas the Christian historical example is quite the opposite. It's rather allowing yourself to be killed, right? Allowing yourself to be, as Christ does, right? Christ, there's even a line in the Gospels where I think like Peter chops off a guy's ear in the garden, or in the Mount of Olives. And so he chops off the ear, and then Jesus says the famous live by the sword, die by the sword, but also he makes this line where he says this line where, don't you think I can bring down like legions of angels to destroy all these people? He's God after all. But he doesn't. He doesn't out of his love, his great investment in his creation. And so he allows himself to be killed and humiliated. Not just killed, humiliated, right? Spat upon, that he might forgive those people spitting on him. And we have to do that too. And that's very unnatural. That's very unnatural. That's very contrary to fallen human nature. It's actually what we're supposed to be. So these modern ideologies, they lean into the fallenness of human nature.
And they'll always fail because they don't have grace.
Right.
We can't, the transfiguration cannot happen without grace. Let's
Right.
not forget that too, right?
Right,
So,
absolutely.
so this is the thing, they don't have that. So no matter, even if they were trying to impose the Christian ideal, if that's not what they came to,
Right.
it wouldn't work because it won't work absent grace.
Exactly, right. It's like, that's why politics, again, it's like you cannot impose grace with the science of politics.
Right.
Right? It's not a series of legal prescriptions, and it's not even a series of truth propositions. It's a total, complete transformation of your inner life that has to be of your free will, of your free response to God. And there's no free response to the National Socialist Party. It's like get in line or die. So anyway,
So you kind of using the Brotherhood and the Legion because they're two. The Brotherhood was like the high school group.
Yeah,
The
so
Legion was the adult group. So
right. So like that's another like this is a rather complex group. It's a very complex time in history. It's a very complex time in Romania, and it has a very complex relationship with the church itself, because a lot of times the church itself would condemn the Brotherhood in some instances, and maybe in others not. But the Brotherhood of the Cross, again, that's the youth group, and the youth group is about personal transformation, and I think in the good sense. And so, in order to form a legionnaire elite, the best from among the youth were selected, beginning with those of the high school age. This organization of young men was named the Fratia de Cruce, the Brotherhood of the Cross. These targeted were screened according to certain criteria: faithfulness in church attendance, good academic achievement, respectfulness towards others, love of country, honesty, etc. Candidates were not admitted to the FDC automatically, but in accordance with certain requirements. It set out to be an elite organization that would accept only the best. Those who were accepted found an atmosphere of love, seriousness, and enthusiasm, an atmosphere highly suitable for their spiritual growth. They received primarily moral and spiritual education along Christian ideas. They were encouraged to participate in the sacrament of confession, to adhere to a prayer schedule, to fast, to avoid bodily sins, to be merciful, correct, punctual, sympathetic, ready to help others, obedient, and studious. Since work played an important role in legionnaire training, work camps were organized in which, along with legionnaires, Brothers of the Cross participated in the construction and repair of churches, schools, roads, bridges, levees, etc. They worked in an atmosphere of youthful enthusiasm, while the camps also provided an opportunity for the formation and strengthening of spiritual ties. The meetings began with a prayer commemorating those who had died for the legionnaire cause, followed by a reading from the New Testament. At every meeting, those present took turns introducing a theme having to do with faith, morality, national history, culture, etc. Legionnaire songs were sung and memorized. Participants took turns reciting from legionnaire writings, while the final portion of the meetings were reserved for decision-making regarding new goodwill projects that needed to be undertaken, such as help for someone in need, collection of assistance for the family of an arrested legionnaire, or similar work for the benefit of their brethren. The young men who gathered together in the FDC made up a real family. They were taught to love one another and help one another in time of need. The friendship that existed between them sprang from an impressive degree of love and sincerity. The most original part of the meetings was the moment of friendship or sincerity, a form of public confession of all mistakes made since the last meeting. This did not replace the sacrament of confession. Each of them also confessed to his spiritual father. Rather, it was an expression of the trust and sincerity that united them. After they all confessed their mistakes, each of them reported what mistakes they had noticed among the others who were present. Then each of them received a penance. These moments of sincerity were very important for strengthening their spiritual bonds within the safety of love and understanding given by the other brothers of the cross. Each of them found the power to struggle against their own mistakes and defects. All the natural noble aspirations of a young soul, friendship, sincerity, love, sacrifice for lofty causes, found fulfillment in the warm atmosphere of the FDC, the Brotherhood of the Cross. And there's more here about that and its relationship to like specific Romanian sort of a Romanian identity. There was an emphasis also in the Legionnaire that, you know, to be knowledgeable of Romanian history and to, you know, be patriotic and to love the Romanian nation. All of those things, again, I don't think are inherently bad at all. And I think a lot of people, especially on the left, they want to paint nationalism with this, or a patriotic spirit as being identical with fascism. And I think we have to reject that. You know, we really have to reject that. So, you know, insofar as you have a concerted effort to, and I think this is something that's really retreated entirely from American culture, you know, is just this emphasis on bringing young men and even young men and young women in community and trying to teach them a sense of personal responsibility about their development, their relationship with other people, and externalizing that in simple things, you know, like repairing bridges and I don't know, doing just kind of simple manual labor. I think we used to have a similar thing, just in the form of the Boy Scouts, honestly. Things like that, just to take young men and to teach them sort of like practical, simple skills. Things like how to carve wood and how to light a fire, campfire, and camping, and all those things. And we essentially have, especially people on the left, have gone out of their way to absolutely annihilate the function of those institutions. Also to, I think, really minimize the importance. I think really too, this is another problem in our culture, is that we try to minimize the need that young men have to have this kind of formation. And when young men don't have this kind of formation, they oftentimes go all the wrong ways in life. I think we do see this a lot in inner city communities where there's a lot of fatherlessness, and we want to pretend that fatherlessness is not a problem. Because a good father, I think in many ways, does what is just described here, but just on a smaller scale. And then there were in our culture, there used to be, points of contact between like the role that the way a father would socialize his son, and then the way that had continuity with things like joining a baseball team or, the Boy Scouts and stuff like that. And I think not to the same degree, but I think like there are just so many young men in our culture that are just absolutely hungry for a higher purpose, for some kind of meaning, right? For something beyond just a kind of hedonistic. The world, especially in universities, doesn't offer higher purpose or meaning. What it offers is a kind of a hedonism, primarily. And I think most people find this really, really empty. They find it really, really lacking. And so, and in that void usually comes lots of different radical ideologies, because that lack of meaning, there's no amount of pleasure that can really kind of paper over this sense of purposelessness, that the human being needs a sense of purpose. And I think the Legionnaire movement, in that context, definitely took young men and gave them this sense of you can do these things, and these things are adding up to this greater purpose. And one of those purposes being, your development. Like, it's important that you develop your moral character. It's important that you learn how to use your intelligence to help people around you. So that, I think, is a good thing, right? And I think that's something that we should aim to create in our own way with this brotherhood as we move forward.
At this point, I'd like, before we conclude, I'd like to try to apply, and then maybe the next discussion too, as we get into some of the other details, but apply, what's there to our own situation. Because you've already addressed, obviously, the condition. Young men are craving this. And they're lost, right? I think that's part of it too. They're just kind of lost. Mm-hmm. You see this. Some of the people we've had come into our parish, they're seekers. And what they love about Orthodoxy is Orthodoxy has a fullness that they don't get anywhere else. I think if you consider societally why is this happening, there's obviously a lot of reasons, but one is that people are easy to manipulate, right? In this, if you don't have anything that you're strongly attached to in the right sense, right, you're driven or that helps to define you in a good way, then you're malleable to any of these other ideologies that can force you in a certain direction to do things that might serve some agenda somewhere, right? Mm-hmm. But anyway, I don't want to focus on that. What I'd like to focus on is, what can we draw from this for our own group? We've been in existence for, about a year and a half now. And so we have a little bit of time. We've seen, things happen. We've already had challenges that we've worked through. I think, personally, that's my, one couple of observations that I'd like to have the group consider is, I like the idea of some form of, not demanding it, not requiring it, but I like the idea of some form of revealing of our struggles, right? Confession of sorts, not the same, once again, it's not a sacramental confession, and it's not to say that everybody has to confess every sin. But I do think accountability like part of what this group can do on the personal level is to help with accountability. If we've fallen short in a certain area, maybe we continue to fall short in that area, it's good. I think there can be helpful to those who are ready to do it, right? They're at a point where they're willing to do that to share some of that. It helps humility for one thing, right? It should, this is kind of the underlying of everything we do is humility, right? And it can be a contributor to that. I don't agree with anything beyond that. I certainly don't think it's good in this group for us to call out each other's, hey, I saw you know this, definitely don't want to go there. I think that's just obviously asking for trouble. I mean, once again, it's not to judge them, maybe that worked for them, but that's not something that I would see as being effective maybe in our circumstances now. But just that whole idea of accountability, the struggles that we have, and kind of like, all right, this week, for one, it's an incentive, right? There's an incentive there. If I know I have to reveal to the group where I fell short, it might motivate me to not fall short, right? just out of human peer pressure or whatever. But more importantly, obviously, than that is just the fact that I think we do tend to, right? It's another human tendency. We tend to think higher of ourselves than is there, and that examination of conscience, as they call it in the Catholic world. I think there's value in that just performing that function for ourselves for the sake of the group will help us to have a better sense of where our weak points are, where we need to improve, of course. And also just to recognize our need for grace once again, that despite all these things that we're doing and where we think, maybe we've had successes or whatever, that we still have room for growth. There's always that room for growth. And I just think as far as building the bonds, I think that's what you see there is that process really helps unite those people in the group. Mm-hmm. And I just think it can't be compelled. It has to be something that we can't go around and say everybody has to say, which sins did you have this week? I don't want it to be something like that. But for those who wish to kind of give us a rundown on the week, the things they're comfortable sharing, I think to have a space where that's possible, there could be some value there in that. And it's how we get to know our brothers too, right? I mean, as this progresses, hopefully as it will, we're engaged in more external projects and that sort of thing, right? Like if you know your brothers, then, from a management perspective, I mean, it's just basic management too, right? Knowing your people's strengths and weaknesses so you can, better facilitate your resources, right? Make sure that, okay, this guy's really good at this guy's really good at that. So when you use these people in the ways that, use in the proper sense, employ them in a manner that's going to play to their strengths, right? But then also too, maybe there's situations where we struggle and we need practice to get better in those areas too. So like moving past just the practical into the spiritual. I don't know. So I'm not sure anybody else thinks about that, but that's the one thing that I read that was kind of impressed by it. That's not something that people, right? Everybody wants to present this face, the best face, right? This is who I am. I'm this person that, is super awesome, right? And you see this so much in the digital world, right? Everybody creates these profiles, where they get to pretend, right? That there's somebody that's totally opposite of what they really are, right? They live with the new Meta thing, right? Like it's just taken it to the level. The new Facebook Meta thing, right? You can create this whole
Meta, You can have your avatar.
Your avatar, you're literally like living in this fake world, right? So, and that's the direction the culture's headed. So, I mean, to counter that, and in ourselves, I think it'd be valuable to at least consider some minor form of that. It doesn't go any further. So, I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think there's definitely value. I think it is important that we share our struggles. One thing that I should have done, for example, was I should have told you guys that my grandfather was in hospice, because then you guys could have prayed for him. The Orthodox Church is all about people praying for each other. We pray to saints, so they pray to God. We pray to each other. Everybody has to intercede for each other, because if God should mark iniquities, who will stand? So everybody has to. We have to, I think, fight it's very easy as modern people to really just live completely compartmentalized lives, where we meet people, like, for example, I get along with the people I work with. I go there, I talk to them. They might even be my friends, except I only know them there. and I won't know them when I leave that job, I'm not going to see them ever again. And that's perfectly fine with everybody involved there. And what that really means is there's no actual real relationship there. There's no community there whatsoever. There's just a relationship of convenience, a happenstance, which is not to say anything bad about anybody. It's just like, that's just the way it is. You know, that's the nature of the workplace. And I don't think the opposite should happen in the workplace, by the way. I don't think that what we should have is like, we should, because there is the concept of the work fam, not into the work fam, not into like making your corporate life your family. I think that's ungodly. Yeah. But we can't, but that attitude is not relegated just to a workplace. It happens in all of our different like segmented lives, but it shouldn't happen here in the church. That's not, that I don't think that's what Christ is asking us. But with that, it is a hard thing that I think we could just take little steps. So maybe that is, I think maybe confession is like the wrong way to call it. Yeah, it's the wrong word, but just like sharing our struggles, we could begin them. I mean, they began the meeting or ended the meeting, I can't remember, but either way, we could just kind of talk about, well, these are the things I'm struggling with. I struggle with my prayer life, or I struggle with this thing,
or report on the week, right? To kind of keep it, this week, this is because it's going to change sometimes too, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of just it's an accountability too, not in a way that's going to be, because you could definitely go wrong in a bad direction. I mean, obviously, if it goes too far, issuing penances and all, no.
Right, yeah.
Okay, but
no, yeah, we've got to keep the sacrament over here. And
the sacrament is a separate thing, but just this whole idea of accounting, right? I mean, if this is more than a social club, if it's a genuine brotherhood, right? Just like your physical brother, right? There's things, you live in the same household, you get an argument, whatever. There's things that go on there, right? And so you see these things. So it's a way of transferring that into to transcend a little bit that like you said, the segmentation of our lives, right? We're transcending those things. I don't just have my life here. Okay, so I'm your brother for a couple hours on Sunday afternoon. No, this brotherhood should, as much as it's possible without being weird, it should extend into our lives past that. Like that's why we're starting to try to have some prayer meetings. Some prayer even through the the Discord and stuff on Wednesday nights. To start trying to, because obviously we have to balance these ideals with practical concerns and considerations that we all work and. We're busy lives, and those of us as families. I mean, we can't sacrifice our obligations to our families for the sake of this group either, right? So it's got to be balanced. But that little bit to be able to, hey, this week this is kind of how things went, and then like you said, we're helping each other. Maybe something that one of us has already worked through, so they can offer some advice. Yeah, I used to struggle with that, and I tried this, and it kind of helped me out. And then we're sharing ideas too, just kind of improve and grow as well.
Yeah.
So anyway, once again, I don't want to make it like mandatory, but for anybody who wants to do that, I think it should maybe be available.
Next week, open the floor to that.
Yeah.
We could just say before anything, I mean, I won't be here, but, just in general, we could, after we do the prayer, open the floor towards that kind of thing, whatever we want to call it, and then jump into whatever the designated activity was.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
We can have the rest of our business. We'll do the rest of it once we turn the camera off.
Okay.
For those who need to go or whatever. So, is there anything else before we?
I think that concludes the discussion of the book for today. Thank you.